of Management Studies IGNOU presents an audio book on the course Mmpc 011 titled Social Processes and Behavioral Issues for MBA Program. Presenting Block 2 titled Intrapersonal Processes. Unit 6 Perception and Attribution Part 1.
Mmpc 011 Unit 6 Perception and Attribution. Objectives. After going through this unit, you would be able to understand the meaning and nature of perception, identify various factors influencing perception, explain different characteristics of perceiver and facets of impression management. Introduction. We humans seem to attach meanings, interpretations, values and aims to our actions. What we do in the world depends on how we understand our place in it, depends on how we perceive ourselves and our social and physical environment, depends on how we perceive our circumstances. We explain behavior with terms like reasons, motive, intention, purpose, desire, and so on. Therefore, the issue is each one of us perceive the world around us in different ways. It is our personal perception of that reality which shapes and directs our behavior and some objective understanding of external reality. For example, if one person on a hillside perceives that it is cold, he or she will reach for his sweater or her sweater. On the other hand, if the person standing next to him or her perceives that it is warm, he or she will remove his or her sweater. These contrasting behaviors can be witnessed happening at the same time, regardless of the actual ambient temperature as measured by a thermometer. Another example would be the universal assumption made by managers that subordinates always want promotion when, in fact, many subordinates really psychologically forced to accept a promotion. Managers seldom attempt to find out and sometimes themselves do not know whether promotion should be offered. In other words, the perceptual world of the manager is quite different from the perceptual world of the subordinates, and both may be different from reality. Thus, it is clear that human behavior is a function of the way in which we perceive the world around us and how we perceive other people and events in that world. We often find ourselves unable to understand other people's behavior. To understand each other's behavior, we need to be able to understand each other's perceptions. First of all, we need to be able to understand why we perceive things differently. Perception is the selection and organization of environmental stimuli to provide meaningful experiences for the perceiver. It is the process through which the information from outside environment is selected, received, organized, and interpreted to make it meaningful. It is an important input in individual behavior. The receiver, the received, and the situation influences one's perception. It is an important variable affecting several areas of an organization. The differences between the perceptual worlds of the employees and managers and the reality of the organization will provide the basic inputs into the understanding of organizational behavior. In this unit, we try to understand the individual differences in terms of the various factors affecting perception, the perception process, and the working of perceptual organization. Attribution theory also forms a part of this unit. Definition and nature of perception. Perception includes all those processes by which an individual receives information about his or her environment, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling. In simple terms, perception is understood as the act of seeing what is there to be seen. The study of perception is concerned with identifying the process through which we interpret and organize sensory information to produce our conscious experience of objects and object relationship. It is the process of receiving information about and making sense of the world around us. Perception implicates the search for obtaining and processing of the information in the mind. It can also be referred to as a psychological process where people obtain information from the environment and make sense of their worlds. Very often, two people who have seen the same thing end up interpreting it differently. The reason for such occurrence is because of the involvement of an extremely complex cognitive process mentioned above. Each person has a unique perception resulting in individual differences in processing information which is received. Perception plays a very important role in shaping the personality of an individual. Through the process of perception, individuals organize and interpret their sensory impressions so as to provide meaning to their environment. It is possible that what is perceived by the individual may be quite different from actual reality. Nature of perception. It is to be noted that perception is a unique interpretation of the situation by the individual and that it is not an identical recording of it. Thus, we have to remember 1. Perception is a complex cognition process giving a unique interpretation of the world, which may be very much different from reality at times. 2. There is a lot of difference between the perceptual world and the real world. 3. Many of the problems occurring in organizations are often found to be the problems of perception. Basic elements in perceptual process. We process and interpret the incoming raw data in the light of our experiences, in terms of our current needs and interest, in terms of our knowledge, expectations, beliefs, and motives. Perception may be defined as the dynamic psychological process elements in the perceptual process. From a psychological point of view, the process of sensation on the one hand and perception on the other hand work together through what are termed respectively bottom-up and top-down processing. The bottom-up phase concerns the way in which we process the raw data received by our sensory apparatus. One of the key characteristics of bottom-up processing concerns the need for selectivity. We are simply not able to process all of the sensory information available to us at any given time. Bottom-up processing screens or filters out redundant and less relevant information so that we can focus on what is important. On the other hand, top-down phase concerns the mental processing that allows us to order, interpret, and make sense of the world around us. One of the key characteristics of top-down processing concerns our need to make sense of our environment and our search for meaning. This distinction between sensation, bottom-up, and perception, top-down, can be illustrated in our ability to make sense to incomplete or even incorrect sensory information. For example, the missing letter or comma or the incorrectly spelled term does not normally interfere with the comprehension of the human reader. All of us have a similar nervous system and share more or less common sensory equipment. However, we have different social and physical backgrounds which give us different values, interests, and expectations and therefore different perceptions. We do not behave in and in response to the world as it really is. This idea of the real world is somewhat arbitrary. In fact, we have and in pre-response to the world as we perceive it. We each live in our own perceptual world. Perception is a dynamic process because it involves ordering and attaching meaning to raw sensory data. Our sensory apparatus is bombarded with vast amounts of information. We are not passive recorders of this sensory data. We are constantly shifting and sorting this stream of information, making sense of it, and interpreting it. Therefore, it can be said that perception is an information processing activity. This information processing concerns the phenomena of selective attention and perceptual organization. Selective attention is the ability, often exercised unconsciously, to choose from the stream of sensory data, to concentrate on particular elements, and to ignore others. The external factors affecting selective attention concern stimulus factors and context factors. However, it may be noted that we do not merely respond to single feature, rather, we respond to the pattern of stimuli available to us. Our attention is also influenced by context factors. For example, the naval commander on the ship's bridge and the cook in the kitchen may both have occasion to shout fire, but these identical utterances will mean quite different things to those within earshot and will lead to radically different forms of behavior. Thus, it is clear that knowledge of the context also affects our attention. The internal factors affecting perception are 1. Learning. Our past experience leads to the development of perceptual expectations or perceptual sets which give us predispositions to perceive and to pay attention to some stimuli and to ignore other information. 2. Personality. Our personality traits also predispose us to perceive the world in particular ways, to pay attention to some issues and events and human characteristics and not others. 3. Motivation. We are more likely to perceive as important and thus to respond to stimuli that we find motivating. Much of perception can be described as classification or categorization. We categorize people as male or female, lazy or energetic, extrovert or shy. We classify objects as cars, buildings, furniture, crockery, and so on. And we refine our classification schemes further under these headings. It may be noted here that these categories are learned. They are social constructs. What we learn is often culture-bound or culture-specific. For example, the British revulsion at the thought of eating dog, the Hindu revulsion at the thought of eating beef, and the Islamic aversion to alcohol are all culturally transmitted emotions based on learned values. However, different people within the same culture have different experiences and develop different expectations. The internal factors, our past experience and what we have learned, our personalities, our motivations, contribute to the development of our expectations of the world around us, what we want from it, what will happen in it, and what should happen. We tend to select information that fits our expectations and pay less attention to information that does not. Our categorization process and the search for meaning and pattern are key characteristics of perception. This perceptual work is captured by the concept of perceptual organization. Perceptual organization is the process through which incoming stimuli are organized or patterned in systematic and meaningful ways. It has been noted that often different people perceive a situation differently in terms of what is selectively perceived and how it is organized, interpreted, and finally perceived by them. Individuals receive stimuli from the environment through their five senses, namely taste, smell, hearing, sight, touch. There is a tendency to selectively pay attention to certain aspects of the environment. In other words, a person's perceptual selection may be on account of the interplay of a complex set of factors. Some are the internal factors, while some form a part of external factors. Say, for instance, the personal secretary to the manager may ignore the sounds of the other employees talking, but jumps up and becomes alert as soon as the telephone starts ringing. The next step involves the perceptual organization. Since there will be variations in how people interpret what they perceive, that is, the person organized the stimuli selected into meaningful pattern depending upon the circumstances and the state of mind of those involved. Perceptual sets and perceptual worlds. In this unit, you have seen how the perceptual process selects incoming stimuli and organizes them into meaningful patterns. It has also been shown that this processing is influenced by learning, motivation, and personality, factors which give rise to expectations. These expectations, in turn, make us more ready to respond to certain stimuli in certain ways and less ready to respond to others. This readiness to respond is called the individual's perceptual set. A perceptual set is an individual's predisposition to respond to events in a particular manner. A perceptual set is also known as a mental set. As we tend to perceive what we expect to perceive, this can also be called our perceptual expectations. We must accept the fact that two people can observe the same but perceive it in quite different ways. Many organizational problems, and particularly communication problems, are created by failure to appreciate this feature of the perceptual process. For example, top management of an organization may perceive that junior employees are overreacting to trivial issues and may dismiss their complaints lightly. On the other hand, the junior employees may perceive that their grievances are genuine and that the top management are simply not taking them seriously. In a situation like this, it makes little sense to ask whose perceptions are correct. The starting point for resolving issues such as this must lie with the recognition that different people hold different but equally legitimate views of the same set of circumstances. Another common example is the differences in perception that occur between their union and management. Some researchers believe that perceptual differences are a major explanation for industrial disputes. The same facts in a dispute are perceived quite differently by union members and by management. For example, union members may perceive that they are underpaid, whereas management perceives that they are overpaid for the amount of work they do. In reality, pay may have nothing to do with the ensuing dispute. It might be due to the workers not having control of their own jobs and getting recognition, and they are reacting by perceiving that they are underpaid. We each have a perceptual world that is selective and partial, which concentrates on features of particular interest and importance to us. The individual's perceptual world is their personal internal image, map, or picture of their social, physical, and organizational environment. Through the process of learning, motivation, and personality development, we each have different expectations and different degrees of readiness to respond to objects, people, and events in different ways. It may be noted here that our perceptions, that is, the meanings that we attach to the information available to us, shape our actions. Behavior in an organization context can usually be understood once we understand the way in which the individual perceives that context. Cultural factors also play a significant role in determining how we interpret available information and experience. Perceptual learning and development take place in the context of socio-cultural environment. It is therefore expected that the socio-cultural background of the individual will influence his or her perceptions. Accordingly, the nature of perceptual organizations will vary. For example, one well-known piece of research compared the pace of life in 6 countries: Britain, Italy, Indonesia, Japan, Taiwan, and the United States, by measuring A. the accuracy of clocks in Citibank branches, B. the speed at which city pedestrians walked, and C. the length of time it took to buy a postage stamp. The research revealed that Japanese cities had the most accurate clocks, the fastest pedestrians, and the most efficient post office clerks. Indonesian cities, in contrast, had the least accurate clocks and slowest pedestrians. Italy had the slowest post office clerks. Therefore, it is clear that to understand an individual's behavior, we need to know something of the elements in their perceptual world and the pattern of information and other cultural influences that have shaped that world. To change an individual's behavior, therefore, we first have to consider changing their perceptions through the information and experiences available to them. Factors influencing perception. It has been understood that each one of us may be the same person, object, or event, and yet think of it differently. Supposing you visit an arts and craft exhibition, take a look around and then ask your friend also to visit the exhibition. Later on, when you exchange notes with your friend, you will be surprised to note that your friend's views and expressions about the display differ. Usually, individuals are involved in a process of perceptual selection whereby people filter out most stimuli so that they can deal with the most important ones. This process depends on several factors. Let us have a look at those factors which affect the perceptual process. The perceiver. 1. The understanding of what a person interprets when looking at the object or target being perceived will be influenced by the personal traits of the individual who perceives this. For instance, we presume an individual is planning to purchase a car, then it is observed that he starts noticing other brands of car with more interest. Of course, this results in the purchase of a particular brand of car which is influenced by his or her perception. And this is how factors associated with the perceiver can greatly influence his or her perceptual process. 2. Attitude influences a person's perception. We can take example, Suma and Uma are 2 friends who have cleared their bachelor's degree in management and are interested in pursuing further studies and get into reputed business management institutes for obtaining an MBA degree. In order to improve their personality, both of them get enrolled into a well-known personality development center. Suma enjoys interacting in a small group because of personal interaction between the lecturer and the student group. However, Uma, basically being an introvert, preferred to be a part of a large group so as to enjoy anonymity amidst the group. When both Suma and Uma sat down for the first session on personality development, With a class of 50 students, Suma seemed unhappy to be amidst a large class, while Uma looked relieved to be able to merge unnoticed into the large class. This example reveals that both Suma and Uma saw the same thing but interpreted it differently. 3. Unsatisfied needs or motives influence an individual's perception strongly. This particular aspect was highlighted in a study with hungry subject. This research study revealed that 16 people who had been hungry for as long as 16 hours saw more frequently images of food when they were shown blurred pictures in comparison to those who had been hungry only for a short time. 4. The perceptual process can also be influenced by one's interest. For instance, a fashion designer is more likely to be noticed a beautiful outfit worn by a girl crossing the road rather than the traffic policeman. This can be because his or her chosen profession has narrowed down his or her focus. 5. One's experience in the past can also narrow down one's focus, and newness or novelty also influences perception. An individual has the tendency to perceive those things or objects to which he or she can relate, but very often one's past experience may reduce or nullify an object's interest. In India, the breaking away of the joint family setup and making way to the working couple nuclear family setup had not been easily accepted by the society, especially during the 70s and 80s of the century. However, from the 90s onwards, with a significant increase in the number of women joining industries and also occupying senior managerial positions, there is a gradual change in people's negative perception, views, or apprehensions about women executives is slowly taking a back seat. 6. Expectations also influence an individual's perception. At times, expectations can affect one's perception, such that if we expect to see something, we may actually end up seeing that. For instance, if we expect lawyers to be unscrupulous, politicians to be corrupt, youngsters to be rude, and so on, we will perceive them to be so, totally ignoring the individual's real traits. The target. Perception is impacted by the motion, sound, size, and other such characteristics of the target. This usually occurs because the target is not perceived in isolation but along with its background. Moreover, we have a tendency to group close things and similar things together. 1. What one sees and perceives will generally depend on how one separates the figure from its general background. For instance, when the lecturer uses the blackboard for teaching and for writing uses white chalk pieces, the students are not seeing them as patches of white chalk but recognize each alphabet and see the words accordingly. 2. At times, even physical and time proximity makes one put together objects or targets even when they are unrelated. For instance, recently we have been hearing of plane crashes involving fighter planes and domestic plane carriers. Suddenly, many people may conclude that it is dangerous to travel by air. Though the above incidents may be unrelated, their proximity in time may have led people to develop such unrealistic perceptions about flying. 3. At times, people have the tendency to perceive people, objects, or events that are similar to each other also as being grouped together. Greater is the similarity, more is the probability of perceiving them as a common group. The situation. The context in which we perceive events or objects is also important. There are elements in our surrounding environment which influence our perception. For instance, if the managing director of a company calls for a meeting with his or her general managers and on that day a junior manager makes a small mistake, the general manager is more likely to register and notice that which otherwise on any other normal day would have been overlooked. If, say, a person attired in a dhoti kurta were to enter the office premises, he is likely to draw more eyes compared to if he were to be attired in the same dress when walking around in the compound of his house. This means that perception is influenced by various situational factors such as time, location, light, heat, and so on. These may simultaneously impact the perception process, making it extremely complex. In brief, the following are the factors influencing perception. The perceiver: A. Attitudes, B. Motives, C. Interests, D. Past experience, E. Expectation. The target: A. The background, B. Physical and time proximity, C. Novelty, D. Motion, E. Sounds, F. Size. The situation: A. Time, B. Work environment, C. Social environment, D. Light, E. Heat. Perceptual organization. Perceptual organization is the process by which people group environmental stimuli into recognizable pattern. That is, an attempt is made to explain what happens during the perceptual process when information from the situation is received. A person is not likely to perceive patches of color or light or smell. On the contrary, the person usually perceives some organized patterns of stimuli and clearly whole objects which are identifiable. For instance, if your father gifts you a motorbike, you do not merely perceive the color or mileage or looks or the seat cover, but you perceive the motorbike as a whole. Simply stated, a person's perceptual process organizes the incoming information into a meaningful whole. Even though it is still too early to clearly state on how the human mind assembles, organizes, and categorizes information. Now, let us take a look at some forms of perceptual organization, namely figure ground principle. According to this principle, perceived objects will be separate from its background. That is, the figure is always perceived to be in contrast to its background and hence will be noticed. Of course, the manner in which the figure is perceived will depend upon the background. Perceptual grouping. This fundamental principle of perceptual grouping refers to the tendency to group several stimuli into a recognizable pattern. This grouping is usually done on the basis of continuity, closure, proximity, and similarity. These factors are briefly explained. A. Continuity. The tendency to perceive objects as continuous patterns. B. Closure. This refers to the tendency to close or complete an object or event and perceive it as a whole, even though only a part of the object is evident. C. Proximity. This refers to the tendency to perceive a group of objects to be related merely because of their closeness. D. Similarity. More is the similarity between the objects, greater is the tendency to perceive them as a common group. Perceptual constancy. Perceptual constancy can be said to be a sophisticated form of perceptual organization. Constancy will highly be appreciated in this tremendously changing and highly complex world. Perceptual constancy works on the principle of learning and that it emanates from patterns of cues. According to this principle, irrespective of the information received by the senses, the size, shape, color, brightness, and location of an object remain fairly constant. The patterns of cues are very often learned by the individual. This learning takes place even though each situation is different, and there are interactions between the inborn and learned tendencies within the entire perceptual process. It is this constancy which helps people to make sense and order out of the chaotic world we live in. For example, with the sudden exit of a financial executive from the firm ABC, a chartered accountant is hired and within a short span of time, he or she is able to put the financial statements in the desired sequence. Take another example. Have you not witnessed the ease with which a plumber picks up a particular piece from the heap of plumbing material? In both the above examples, it is due to constancy that both the chartered accountant and the plumber were able to go ahead with their task. For if it were not so, both of them would have seen the size, color, and shape change every time they looked around and would not have been able to perform their job efficiently. Perceptual context. Perceptual context is the highest form of perceptual organization. It is this context which gives meaning and value to simple stimuli, objects, events, situations, and other individuals in the environment. The organization structure and organization culture are a primary context for the employees, and all their behavior will be relevant to this. For instance, within the organization, a piece of information communicated in the form of a circular, a notice, a suggestion, a pat on the back, a smile, and a raised eyebrow will acquire a special meaning and added value when placed in the context of the work organization. Since each context is unique, it will impart a special connotation or meaning to stimuli. Perceptual defense. Perceptual defense can be said to be a form of perceptual error, which could occur in reference to perceptual context. It is based on the principle that may prompt a person to build up a defense, to recognize a stimulus or a situational event in a context which may be personally or culturally unacceptable or threatening. Simply put, perceptual defense refers to the tendency among people to protect themselves against ideas, objects, or situations which may seem threatening.
We were listening to the audiobook by the School of Management Studies IGNOU for MBA program. Course code Mmpc 011, titled Social Processes and Behavioral Issues. Course Coordinator Professor Srilata. Voiceover by Renuka. Edited by Ashok Sharma. Program assisted by Tarannum Jaha. Program produced by Dr. Manoj Kumar Singh. This program was brought to you by Electronic Media Production Center of Indira Gandhi National Open University.